Hey folks, Alex Wiseman here, coming to you all the way from Riyadh, Saudi Arabia, where I'm in a lovely hotel room. I like to call it the little yellow box. So, coming to you from the little yellow box today, we're going to be talking about conceptual frameworks. This is week 6 of our class, and we have quite a bit to cover. There are a couple of things, though, that I want to remind you that you're doing this week. This is February 20th is our regular class day. One is you need to make sure that you turn in assignment number 5, Goals and Objectives. The description of what's required for the assignment is in the syllabus, so please make sure that you take a look at that, and I'm sure you've already been discussing it with your groups. Just have it up and ready. I tried to get everything graded and back to you in a little more time than usual this time so that you could consider some of my comments as you develop the goals and objectives. Hopefully that helped. So what I'd like for you to do this week, I obviously would like for you to watch these screencasts. I think that's very important to watch the screencasts. I have noted that not all of you have been watching the screencast, let's just say it straight out, from last week. And I think it's important to watch it, especially since we're not having live classes. And it's a small investment of your time. I think it's about an hour. So if you take an hour to watch the screencast, then you take the rest of your time that's available for this class this week to meet with your groups and develop what you're doing next. I think that we will move forward in this class rather easily. So please make sure that you do that. One of the things I'd like to remind you to do is to work on revising all of your previous assignments into a more coherent piece. Let me get my pointer going here. Right, I think this is really important. I'm not going to ask you to do any sort of independent evaluation of other groups' assignments this week, which I have been having you do every week, and I know it says on the syllabus that we do it, but I think that it is better for you this week to get together with your group, and instead of critiquing another group's assignment, I would really like for you to do this. Work on revising all of your previous assignments into a coherent piece. Because remember, all of these fit together eventually to become a complete grant proposal. When you're getting together with your group, I would like to encourage you to certainly use Steps 101 for group meetings during our regularly scheduled class time. The room is reserved just for us. You may use anything that you'd like in that room. Feel free to log into the computer, use the big screen, spread out in the space, whatever you need to do it. Secondly, I'd like for you to obviously be working together to think about whether your team has a conceptual framework, first of all. Secondly, do you think that your team needs to produce a conceptual framework for the grant maker that you're going to be submitting your final proposal to? If so, I'd like for you to go ahead and do assignment 5.1 and submit it before next week's class. If not, I would encourage you to still work on assignment 5.1, which is developing a conceptual framework, and submitting it, because you can get bonus points if you do. In fact, you can get bonus points either way. Anyone who submits it has the potential for bonus points. And I think I've already said that I can award up to 5 bonus points, just like a regular assignment. So if you're interested, I'd put one together. Just to remind you what exactly assignment 5.1 is, since we're going to be talking about conceptual frameworks today anyway, remember, it's optional. But what I want you to do is I want you to present a conceptual framework that helps to explain and clarify your proposed design. This is how you will actually develop, implement, and evaluate your proposed project or program. In so doing, I would like for you to define the main constructs and show their relationship to one another, to the goals and objectives, and to the proposed program or project, as well as the related literature. The main constructs, another way of saying construct is to say an idea or a concept, right? It's something that constructs your proposal or your proposed activity. It puts the pieces together, right? And so you're trying to show how the different pieces fit together for the project or the program that you're proposing. Now, I have in the written description of the assignment this bit here, which I just want to go over again. And I'm going to read it, and then I'm going to comment. So, unless required by the funding organization's grant guidelines, you should not have your conceptual framework take the form of an extended general review of the literature. That isn't what it is. Do not do a review of the literature. The literature can provide construct definitions, theoretical frameworks, examples of successful strategies used in similar circumstances, or display where your study would fit into the ongoing conversation among scholars and academics. But the conceptual framework section is not a literature review. It just isn't. Right? So don't write it like that. The point of it is to show the relationship of the constructs to each other, to the goals and objectives of your study, and to what you actually think you're going to do. Yeah, you're going to use the related literature to get at that, but it's not a lit review. So the primary emphasis should be on the concepts and relationships assembled for your own proposed program or project. Sorry, there's a lot of P's there, a lot of alliteration. I would really like it if you do this assignment, and even if you don't, to think about a graphic format, a figure or a diagram that you could use to achieve clarity, that you could use to actually visually demonstrate what your conceptual framework was. And the way that I've described this before, and I'll describe it this way to you right now, let's say you have construct 1, construct 2, construct 3. Maybe this one's teachers, maybe this one's students, maybe this one's hygiene. Okay? So these are your main constructs. What do teachers do? What do students do? What's hygiene got to do with it? And you're trying to look at the relationships between each of these different things, right? And eventually, you want to get at how do these relationships connect? That's what a conceptual framework does. It explains this. It explains how you think about the connections, the relationships between the constructs and how they fit with the goals, the project, the literature, etc. All right. If you have any questions about that, please email me. I'd be happy to answer. I'm trying to answer my email while I'm traveling within 24 hours, so I'm happy to answer your email within 24 hours. So why do we care about conceptual frameworks? Well, it's a good question. So honestly, conceptual framework may not always be required in a grant proposal. I'm not sure for any of your grant makers, your funding agencies, if they require a conceptual framework. You should check though. You should be familiar with that. Still, whether it's required or not, I don't think anything should start without developing one. If you don't have a framework for how you're thinking about this, then why are you doing it? And one of the reasons why you should always develop one is because there is more understanding and confusion about the conceptual framework than any other part of a proposal or a project. So if you're not on the same page as your team members on the grant writing team or on the grant making team or the people who are implementing the program or the project on the ground, right, there has to be this common core of understanding. And that's what a conceptual framework does, is it brings people together around a common core of understanding. So, you need to ask, what is it that we're trying to do? What is the purpose of what we're trying to do, and how are we going to approach it? Now, I had you work on the mission statement, and I had you talk a lot with each other at the beginning of the semester about what you think you're doing. So you should have a pretty firm basis and be able to answer these questions, I would think, relatively well. Which means if you've done that, you are just a tiny step away from having a conceptual framework. And that's important because it is an integral part of understanding and analyzing the problem that you propose to address or solve. So that's why you should care. The other thing to know is that the conceptual framework complements the proposal. Now think of it this way. It's a clear statement of the problem, but the clear statement of the problem often doesn't occur until the conceptual framework is developed. So even though you've already stated what the problem is in your intro section and in some other sections that I've already had you write, the only way that that is going to be clearly stated is if you have a conceptual framework already floating around in there. And hopefully you do. So it should be considered complementary to the introduction and the needs statement and the goals and objectives, rather than just as a fourth step or another thing that you're doing. Now, the reasoning in the conceptual framework will run through the whole proposal. So why not be able to articulate it clearly and explicitly, at least to yourselves, if not to the grant makers, because it's going to be threaded through everything that you're doing anyway. And if you don't have a clear conception of your framework, of the way that you're thinking about the relationship between all these constructs, then the proposal itself is going to seem rather disorganized and disjointed, because you won't have a common understanding that you're always sort of returning to. You'll constantly be reinventing what you're doing in every new section, and that's really not going to ever help you. But I'll be honest with you. Conceptual frameworks are hard work, and they're often very frustrating. That's one of the reasons why the conceptual framework is often neglected or done hastily and inadequately. It is just not easy to articulate conceptual frameworks. Even though we might all have them, we just don't know how to say them. And the reason why that they're hard work and often frustrating is because they require pretty complex reasoning and abilities. And I have to say, and I think I said this to those of you who had me in the introduction to Comparative and International Education class, CIE 400, that a reason why having a theory, is what we were calling a theory, or a conceptual framework, is important is because at Lehigh, in our program, we set ourselves apart because we do have that fundamental understanding, because we do have a basic conceptual model that we operate from. And it doesn't mean that we are set in stone on what that is, and it doesn't mean that we can't shift our model or test and, quite frankly, disprove our models or our frameworks. It simply means that we are establishing that as a way to make sense of the phenomenon. It requires abstract reasoning. It requires the recognition and synthesis of central points. It requires knowledge of existing relevant theory. It requires understanding the details of a problem and the surrounding issues and context. These are all things we're supposed to be doing anyway in comparative international education, so why wouldn't we go ahead and develop that for a grant proposal, just like we would for a research paper or something else? And finally, in this screencast, before I close and come back to you in the second screencast, let me just emphasize that conceptual frameworks are real work. They're often overlooked by grant writers because grant writers want to get on with the real work of developing their project or their proposal or their program instead of theorizing, especially when they've got really weighty subject matter or problem-solving projects and programs. And they think looking at conceptual frameworks and theories that might support that is just all fluff. Well, I'm here to tell you it isn't fluff. It is real work. It is the real stuff that you do. And if you fail to conceptualize while planning, it can actually slow down the proposed program or project because you won't, again, be operating on the same foundation, the same assumptions, the same way of thinking about your proposed project or program when it's being implemented. And that can lead to fatal errors in the design or the development or the procedures or the interpretation of what you're proposing that you do. So get serious about conceptual frameworks, folks. I'm trying to really encourage you that that's an important thing for grant proposals. And we will take a pause here and come back with the second part of our screencast on developing conceptual frameworks for grant proposals.